Welcome to the Connect, Practice, Track, and Grow podcast brought to you by ROOST Real Estate Company. I'm Chris McAllister, and I'm here with my co-host, Laci LeBlanc. And on today's episode, we're tackling a topic most agents, or a lot of agents, avoid, working with residential property investors. So we've invited one of the best realtors we know to join us, our Director of Sales, Priscilla McNamee. Good morning, Priscilla. Good morning, Laci.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Priscilla's got years of experience working with, retail buyers and sellers, but she's also got, what is it, close to 25, 30 years of working with investors as well. So she's going to help us unpack what agents really need to know about successfully working with investors. A lot of agents think investors are too demanding, too disloyal, or in some instances, just too much math. But the truth is, when you learn how to serve them, investors can be your most loyal, repeat clients, and they can help you build a bigger and a more resilient business.
So I think that's really interesting because I don't, as somebody who comes from a family of investors, right? I don't see them that way at all. Obviously, I'm related to them. They're my nana and my dad and my uncle, So why do you think so many agents are afraid of investors, or why do you think they have these kind of preconceived notions about them?
Well, personally, I think a lot of times agents are put on the spot. They're showing a property, and then they're asked questions that may have to do with things that only investors would think about, or that, traditional buyers and sellers, retail buyers and sellers don't think about. And when I got my license, and this was 25 years ago now, I was learning by doing, but I had basically the same week that or the same month that I got my real estate license, I bought my first rental property. So, when I started working with investors, I still might not have known what the hell I was doing, but at least I was in it and I was able to actually learn from them and let them know that, I was learning as I was doing. But I think it's I think it's because most realtors, they're not taught how to think like investors, right? Real estate school trains us to, I wouldn't even say it trains us to serve retail homeowners, or, I think that real estate school, for the most part, trains us, what we need to know to pass the state test. But sometimes with your investors, and that conversation turns to return on investment or cap rate, a lot of us just freeze because I know this sounds stereotypical, but a lot of us agents don't care for math. We're really good at 3%, don't get me wrong, but as a rule, doing math and figuring out these equations is just something that's natural, and it's not something that's necessarily taught. I mean, what have you seen, Priscilla, in your career when you've worked with investors? I know you've worked with several throughout the last few years. What have you found?
Now, I completely agree with you on that. And I think it's extremely important, like you said, that you allow your investor to know that you're learning from them as well. I mean, we're not know-it-alls, let's face it. And a lot of them have more experience out there than we do when it comes to, buying those investment properties. So, I mean, I've learned quite a bit from investors that I've worked with, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that as long as they know you're trying, as long as they know that you're, gonna, if you don't know something, you're gonna say you don't know something and you're willing to learn, that is, sadly a rarity in our business. And a good investor, an intentional investor, somebody who's in it for the long term, they're going to latch on to an agent that is going to try to understand their business and understand what their true goals are. So I think that's why working with investors is such a great niche. And that's the title of this. It's working with investors could be the niche that makes you rich. And Priscilla, you and I work by referral. It's our whole life, and it's just nice to have clients like this that keep coming back because we, doing everything we can to help them meet their goals.
Absolutely. And I think right now, especially, like, we have a lot of investors that are inquiring in our market from the West Coast, but a lot of them have misconceptions of some of the properties. So it does take an agent who is bold enough and willing to give them raw numbers and give them a really good idea of what the market is, and not just not tell them everything they want to hear.
Right.
I don't want to set them up for failure, especially when they're 3,000 miles away.
Exactly. Well, and that's
Yeah,
interesting.
it doesn't sound like it's unlike other niche, like marketing, for example, right? If you have a great understanding of marketing, then even if you don't know the specifics of digital marketing, right, then you're going to be able to identify your target audience. You're going to be able to, know the messaging. You're going to be able to think in channels. So if you have that kind of base knowledge, right, like a real estate agent does, then you're going to be able to apply that to these other niches. So I think that's a really important point, Priscilla and Chris, is that you want an agent who knows the ins and outs of buying and selling properties, of purchasing properties and acquiring properties, because those are the things the investors don't have, right? So I think it's really important, like you said, that you let them know you're learning from them as well. But I don't want to undermine the value of a really good real estate agent in these transactions with investors either.
No, I think that's true. But the other thing is telling the truth, right? And a lot of times these folks, and this happened during COVID, we had people from all over the world buying properties in Ohio during COVID sight unseen. And it was a special agent that understood what their goals truly were, but also had the, I don't want to say integrity, but the wherewithal to push back and say, I hear what you're saying about this, but this house that, you can buy for 50,000, it's going to cost you 50,000, to put this back into service again. And part of being a agent or a broker that's in demand for investors, it's first being a fantastic agent. Secondly, it's being able to at least understand the math they're using and what their financial goals are. And third, it's at least a rudimentary understanding of, I don't want construction, or at least what it means to have a house being rent ready and inhabitable. And I think a lot of folks missed that during the last big run we had during COVID.
Yeah, property management is being in the property management business certainly helps, I think, understand whether an investment is a good investment or it could be a problematic investment. You guys talked a little bit about this, but I want to hear what your first experience was working with an investor as an agent and how that, like how that felt and kind of what the outcome was.
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You go first. I'll let you go first. I'm trying
So,
to think of my first experience.
well, so for me, I did have quite a few agents, quite a few investors that I was working with early on, and part of it was because I was eager to share that I was also buying investment properties at the time. But after the crash, when everything got ridiculously cheap in 2009, 2010, I started working with my attorney in town, who actually, Tom will tell you that he's a real estate investor that does practices law on the side. So this is a family that had a tremendous amount of real estate experience, but they didn't have an agent that, could keep up or put up with what it took to find deals that really made sense and penciled out. Because, this family, they've been at it for generations. They have very clear, very strict financial outcomes that they aim for, and they don't take unnecessary chances. And it took me a long time and a lot of Sunday afternoons looking at a lot of properties to start to understand what they were looking for and how the math worked, right? We talk a lot about doing a thumbnail calculation in our heads. And, I got to the point where we would be able to look at a property, and I'm telling you, for at least 2.5 years, every Sunday afternoon, we were out looking at foreclosures and properties for sale. And it got to the point where, we were so in depth, or I was so in depth that, we could come up with immediately what this property would rent for fixed up. We could come up with a quick guess at what it was going to cost to fix it. And based on that, and the fact that we knew, I think we used like 60%, of if something was going to rent for $1,000, then, basically after all the stuff like taxes, insurance, and all that, you'd probably get, what is it, 40 cents on the dollar, let's say. So if you had, say that 40 cents on the dollar was $400 a month, or 48,000, and you wanted a 10% cap rate, and I know I'm going too fast, and we actually have a neat little training thing coming out, that you're going to be able to click on by the time you see this podcast to get all these down and dirty equations so you can do them in your head as well. But basically, if it was $4,800 a year that you could anticipate in profit for that house that you're walking through, then you should have no more than, and this is an extreme case, but that property you should not pay more than 48,000. So if you wanted a 10% cap rate, if you're going to make $400 a month, then that property can't cost more than 50,000. Now, let's say that property is 50,000, but you know it's going to cost you $15,000 to fix it. So your offer is $35,000. Back in post-crash times, we could buy houses all day long for less than 35,000, put them back in service, and make money doing it. Now, again, that's an extreme case, and I know I'm probably just making people that much more nervous because of trying to do this math in my head. But that's the kind of quick and dirty ROI calculation or quick and dirty purchase offer calculation that we as agents working with investors need to make. And you'll notice the list price drove what we looked at, but the list price never once enters into our thought process or calculation about what that property is truly worth to a successful long-term investor. So, I mean, I learned so much from them. They're still friends, still clients. There's just not much to buy these days, right? So we don't have Sunday afternoons together anymore. But I think that goes back to just an extreme example of how, your clients are going to teach you so much, and what they get in return is somebody who's going to be there when they need them, does what they say they're going to do, show up, and is willing to, keep up with the volume, because a lot of these guys buy a lot of houses. So that was a lot.
Well, that was another really good insight, though, is that every portfolio, every investor is different. Just like working with home buyers and sellers, the basis of knowledge that you have to have is there. All those terms that you throw out, Chris, all the calculations you have to make, you have to know that regardless. But not every investor has the same goal. Not every investor has the same portfolio. Not every investor would be interested in the same property. So being able to be flexible on the spot and to get to know an investor, it's really relationship based, just like the rest of the real estate business,
It is.
the way we do it, right?
It is.
How about
Priscilla,
you, Priscilla? What's your first experience with an investor, or one of your firsts?
Probably, I mean, it was actually a really great experience. I mean, they were people that I knew, so they were very forgiving. Let's just
That's
put it
right.
that way. Following the same numbers that Chris is talking about. But through time, and I've sold a lot of properties for them also. After they've picked up a lot of properties on their own, I've sold them properties, and then we've in turn sold those properties. The great thing about working with investors like that, though, is that in today's market, which is something that I really like, I'm kind of like switching gears here, but like with all of the new NAR guidelines with commission and everything, for example, I've got a set of investors that I have sold probably, I think we're on our 10th property this year. I can structure an offer, adjusting my commission to be way more competitive against other agents in a competitive multiple offer situation, is what I'm trying to say. So like, I guess what I'm saying is I am willing to cut them a deal on commission, basically, in order to leverage their offer to get their offer accepted. And it's worked.
Right.
Because like I said, I'm selling them so many properties that I'm making money. They're great repeat clients. They also sell properties with me. So it's a great relationship. And there's a level of loyalty there that I have with them that you gain with these investors, which is so nice. Plus, they also know, like for me especially, when I sit down with an investor, I always let them know that I don't have another investor that is competing in the same arena as them. So I also let them know that I am not competing with them. So I'm not an active investor that's out there bidding against them on any of these kind of properties that they're looking at. So I think that gives them a lot of encouragement. They have faith in me and they feel comfortable working with me. With that being said.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. But you're coming at it, Priscilla, from the perspective as being a business owner yourself. And that's one of what makes you successful is you look at your real estate practice as a business, and you know that if you've got a client that's going to come back to you year after year after year, and at some point they're going to liquidate those properties and you're going to be the listing agent. And if you, I hate the word discount, right? That if you, have a
Strategically reduce.
A strategically reduced investor buyer agent friends and family rate, that is just good business. And you're not giving away the farm, you're still making money. And quite frankly, the very best investors out there want us to make money, as their agents and so forth. And it's same with our clients in the property management business. None of those folks want us to, they all expect us to make money. They all expect us to make enough money to live and live well and to be here next year. But that doesn't mean that we don't understand that in a competitive market that it doesn't make sense, like you said, to make a strategic fee arrangement, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not that much different than what we do for our property management clients. We have a set rate that we advertise to the public, but if we have investor clients with 20 plus units, or there's a 20 plus unit fee rate that's different than a 1 to 10 unit fee rate. And as we move forward and we start actively courting institutional investors, there'll be a new fee rate for those owners that have 50 plus properties. But that's just smart business. So congratulations.
I appreciate that. Well, plus, I mean, the referral business that they send as well. So, I mean, it offsets, it all makes it comes full circle to you.
Yeah. And that's why it's the niche that makes you rich.
Well, and I think a lot of agents, they tend to get focused on the right now instead of the future. And they don't think about that. Like, you have a lot of agents that get so hung up on, I want my full fee, and they're not thinking about a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road.
The other thing that's interesting is investors require, a certain level of performance. Again, they're very patient, they're very helpful, they want to train, but they're not hiring. God bless you, you're the most charming person I know, but they didn't hire and keep you because of your charm alone, right? They're hiring and keeping you because you're competent. You're a fantastic realtor. You understand what they're doing. So that, that's a huge difference too. It's not like that investors just magically you get repeat business. You do have to earn that business, and it does come from basic competency and doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, I want to come back to the opportunity and the niche that makes you rich. I want to come back to investors as a loyal client base, but let's go back a step, and I want to talk about that competency for just a second. I'm under the impression that as a real estate agent, you don't get a lot of training in all of those words, that vocabulary that you threw out there earlier, Chris, that a lot of our heads are probably spinning now. You don't
At least I didn't. Did you, Priscilla?
Not at all.
Right. So there's not a lot of continuing education. Like, what would you say is the most extreme thing that you have to learn, like outside of your skill set, or the thing that agents struggle with the most, maybe when they start working with investors? I feel like we need to go back to that competency, because people are thinking, oh yeah, it does sound like a great niche, but I don't know anything about investing. So where do I even start?
I think they're most fearful of the math of calculating their return on their investment. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you talk to any agent, if you talk to 10 agents, I would say 8 or 9 of those agents, if you ask them, what was the worst thing about taking the test, or the worst thing about passing your real estate license exam, I would bet that 7 to 9, at least 9, are going to say it was the math that scared them the most.
Look, I hear you. You're talking to a journalism major. I like words, letters, pictures. No math here. Thank you.
Yeah. And you hear words like cap rate and net operating income and all that stuff. We're not talking about being, CCIMs, right? We're not talking about being commercial experts. And the other thing is, with AI and Google, you can basically feed ChatGPT some basic numbers and say, calculate this and this for me. So we don't have to know those things. It's not a skill set that's required. We have to know what it is. We have to understand it as a tool. We have to understand it as a way to, figure out what a property is worth. But we've got tools that can do that for us. But I've never been to a continuing ed class that talked about how to work with investors, or gave, short, simple, real English language, just us guys talking ways to do quick evaluations on a property. And that's what I'm excited about providing with this new training that we're putting together.
When you talked about how you have felt out of your depth with investors, especially early on when you guys started working with investors, what's the solution there? What if you're in the middle of, you're looking at a house or you're on the phone and you're talking to them about a potential investment and they ask you something and you just don't know, like, you mentioned honesty, but like, what's your response to that? What do you do in that situation?
Priscilla, my flip response is that's why God made Google, and that's why I have a cell phone.
My response is, let me get a hold of my broker.
And let them make something up.
Oh, no, seriously. I always tell my clients, I do not know it all. Just because I've been in the business for 32 years, I am no expert for real. This business is constantly changing, but I have a ton of resources, within my office and outside of the office. So I'll get the answer for you.
It's so funny you said that this business is constantly changing, but I would say that the one constant in my 25 years has been investors. And, when the market's good for investors, they're right there with us and they appreciate competency. They appreciate showing up, doing what you say they're going to do, and being willing to learn. And then when things are a little tough right now, the investors are sort of holding on to their cash and they've sort of disappeared. But as long as, you stay in touch, as, we do at Roost, as soon as that market changes, they're going to be back. And as soon as we see something, I mean, I'm sure Priscilla, you're the same way. I mean, you see houses and you flash, oh my God, this would be perfect for so and so, and you're getting on the phone and you're providing value that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just simple phone calls of keeping them in tune to what the market is doing. For example, there was an auction on a busy street in Springfield that brought quite a bit of money on a double, side by side double that I never thought that they would bring. And I had called a couple of investors just to let them know that, hey, I'm really shocked by this price because that really changes the game for them on some of the properties that they own and some of the properties that we've been looking at. And just that simple little 2-minute phone call, I mean, it just means so much to them because you're actually thinking about them, you're paying attention to the market, you're staying in touch, and you're just giving them that added value.
So even in a market when you're not looking, when investors are not buying, right? Like this market, I feel like keeping their finger on the pulse is something really valuable, like of what the market is doing. Like you said, Priscilla and Chris, that reminds me of like our best bets and our featured investment properties. So just tell me about that for just a minute, about how that helps investors kind of keep their finger on the pulse. Maybe talk about our off-market opportunities. I just feel like there's so many things that an agent can do for investors, and we have some great examples of that.
Well, any agent that's in our market area, if they're listening, they're welcome to go to our website and you hit the drop down for investing, and there's a link there for the Roost Investment Gateway. And it's a super cool platform because we work with a company called Rescover. And what happens is all of our MLS feeds, whether it's Florida, Columbus, Western Regional, where Springfield is, or Dayton, our Roost Investment Gateway takes all of that information for every single listing and it runs it through an algorithm, and it basically tells you which of these listings could potentially be a great investment property. So it's like the top of a funnel. It takes all these hundreds, if not thousands of listings, and it sorts it out to the ones that actually might make money as investment property. And then what happens is I have like my favorite neighborhoods, not so much just my favorite neighborhoods, but we look after about 1,000 doors, in these market areas, and they happen to be clustered in certain areas. So I set up searches in the investor gateway in these markets where our successful investors are already working. And every morning I get an email from Rescover that says this went up for sale yesterday. I click on it, I see, how it looks from a return on investment perspective or cap rate and so forth, because it calculates that for you automatically. So you don't have to know math. And I click on that. And every time I click on it and feature it on our website, what happens is that those get rolled up into a weekly email that we call Best Bets. So when anybody opens up a Friday morning email called Best Bets from Roost and the Landlord Profitability Playbook, you're going to know that those properties are the ones out of all the properties that were listed, in the past couple of weeks, that these are the ones that have the best likelihood of being money makers. It's a great place to start. Now, I'm not going to say that it's it's a wonderful thing and it's opened up this whole opportunity for great deals. It hasn't, because that's not the market that we're in. But that's a great opportunity. The other thing, though, if you're listening, if you have an investor out there that's looking to buy some properties, we almost always have an investor or several investors that have a property here and there that they'd like to sell, just like all of our most successful investors. If there's one thing that we could do for them, it would be bring them a deal. Right? So they're always looking to buy a great deal. They're always looking to sell from time to time. So, we don't have any magic off market, great deal situations. But again, when you're working with a great agent, they're the ones that are more likely to be informed of one of those opportunities right before anybody else is. And if you've got a relationship with that investor, chances are they're going to call you first. I don't know if that answered your question, Laci, but it's funny. We're doing everything we possibly can to surface great deals right now because that's what our successful investors want. It's just a tough time in the business. But I will tell you, just like when we, talked last week about investor seasons, this too shall pass. And I do think that if not next year, the year after, I think that we will start shifting to a buyer's market for investors.
I
Yeah,
agree
that was
with
exactly
you.
the answer I wanted as the marketer in me, that wants to promote all of these things. And I want to emphasize that you said that they're available to everybody. We don't
Yeah,
gatekeep these things.
absolutely.
We have the tools and we share the tools because we want people to know what the market is doing and have realistic expectations. I think that's one part of this. But we talked about, building these skills. We talked about the tools that you need and kind of the how you get to be an agent who can work with investors. We talked a little bit about how investors are a really good, loyal niche, but I want to, if I can, shift gears just a little bit because I want to talk about some myths that are out there about working with real estate investors. You guys have these conversations with other agents. And I want to know what you hear most often from other agents about working with investors or another niche that is just not true or that you think is maybe based not quite in reality.
I would say that it's a myth out there that investors only care about price. Yes, investors care about price, but to the end of they don't want to buy something that's not going to be profitable for them. What they really care about is about performance. They care about being able to buy a property that works within their box. Now, a good seasoned long-term investor, they are not unrealistic. Now, a lot of times, and I think maybe this is where what turns agents off. We do talk to people all the time that will get on the phone with us as agents. They present themselves as investors, and it's turned out they haven't bought a property yet. They don't have a down payment yet. They've been listening to Bigger Pockets religiously for a few weeks, and suddenly they think they're an expert. Now, those are the folks that I don't know if it even means that they're coming at it from price, but they're coming at it from a perspective of they're already smarter than the rest of us because they're, even considering buying investment property. A lot of times those people, it's tough to work with them because they're taught to come at you with a list of 20 questions and, gauging your past performance and how many investors, all that stuff, right? I don't begrudge them that. If they don't already know, like, and trust me as a consummate professional, I probably don't want to work with them anyway. And maybe that's just hateful for me to say. But I can tell you that investors, you've got buyers. I've always taught my agents, don't work with assholes, right? I don't care how big the commission is. If you're working with somebody who's impossible to work with, doesn't value what you bring to the table, treat you like crap, whatever it is, you are much better off walking away and going to get a W-2 job. And I think it's the same thing with investors. Are there investors out there that are mean or, whatever personalities don't mesh with theirs? Absolutely. But I will tell you, in my experience, it's investors that understand loyalty. It's investors that understand the long term. It's investors that understand relationships. You have a much better chance of working with an investor and establishing a relationship that's positive for the long term for both of you, honestly, than you do working strictly retail. I mean, does that make any sense, Priscilla, or is that just me being biased?
No, I completely agree with you. And I do feel like it has shifted quite a bit where investors, like you said, it's not just about profit. I mean, they are hyper focused on the condition of properties as well. I've noticed that significantly. But it's also because Clark County, especially like Clark and Champaign County, we've seen such a significant rise in pricing over the last few years. So, like you said, people are not buying investment properties at the low prices of 35,000 like they were previously. So they don't want to buy something for full retail and then have to dump another $30,000 into it. They
Right.
just don't want to do that. So they're making smart, wise choices. They are. Another thing that I'll add to this is that I do encourage investors as they're starting to look that it's okay, like you said, like off-market properties, they're not going to come just from us. They're going to be they're going to come across opportunities on their own. And I make sure that they know that I'm available for them. If they have any questions about stuff like that, I'm here for them to give them advice on that, on those types of properties. I'm not going to charge them for my services to look over a property like that. That is my duty as their agent to help them. So, and I've had clients pick up properties that I'm shocked. I mean, I've had an investor that was able to pick up a property off market for 35,000, and good for them. It was the perk of being there at the right time.
Right. But you're a trusted member of their team, right? You're
Exactly.
there for them for their entire business, their entire portfolio, anything that comes up. You're not just there for the next transaction.
Exactly.
And I do think it honestly, I don't know a lot of agents that do good long-term repeat work with investors that have a transaction mindset. If you don't have that relationship mindset, if you're not there to provide value to their overall business, not just that next transaction, then yeah, I don't know that those folks are going to be loyal. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that but it does mean that if you're providing value as a professional to these folks and you're there for them for as long as you're both up and running and working, that they're gonna be loyal, and reciprocally you're going to be loyal to them.
Yeah. And being honest about value, like I said, whether it's something they want to hear or not.
Absolutely. And a lot of times that's a hard conversation to have, and people want to push back, and you've got to stand your ground. You got to have the courage of your convictions. It doesn't mean you can't go out and get a second opinion. Doesn't mean you can't be open to this and that. But the fact is, especially with somebody's buying from out of state, you've got to be honest with them. I can't tell you how many folks I've talked to recently that bought houses in Columbus during COVID, and they never made the money they thought they were going to make, and now they're interested in getting out from under them, and the market has softened up. And as a real estate professional, you never want to be in that position. I guarantee you the people who sold them those houses are not getting repeat business. Let's put it that way.
I think that's a great point is that, underlying, I think one of the fears that agents probably feel is that it's more than just a transaction. I think that these investors tie their real estate agents to the outcomes, right? If they purchase the property and the transaction goes really, really well, that's one thing. But how does the management go? How is the profitability of that property long term, right? When it's a year later or 2 years later or 5 years later, how did that property end up performing? So, being tied to the outcome of that investment versus just the transaction itself, I think is a really big deal, and can probably be pretty intimidating when you think
And
about it.
And it's funny you're talking about that because we've been working on actually both of a referral program for agents out there to if they have investors that they're working with that possibly need property management or a second opinion, that they can come and talk to our property management team. But I do think it's important that any agent who wants to work with investors for the long term, if they're not already doing property management or have a property management division in their office, that they should make friends. They should, create a partnership with a property management firm no differently than they would have a partnership with a lender or with a title company. Because at the end of the day, you want a situation that's going to make both of you, everybody wants to look good, right? So you may look at a property and, you may feel pretty good about it, but, as an agent, it probably makes sense, or sometimes it makes sense for you to, call your friendly neighborhood property management partner and have them take a look at it and get a detailed scope of work for what it's going to cost to fix it up the first time, what they think it'll rent for, and things like that. So it still goes back to that partnership. And just like I said, we're putting together a training guide for how to work with real estate investors. And, we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One, yes, it's great to elevate the industry, so to speak, right? It's great to be able to have more agents informed about working with investors because ultimately it makes our life in property management that much easier. But the other thing is, I think if we had some agents that we could help get more comfortable working with investors, then we're probably more likely to get referrals from those agents for property management, right? So a little bit of selfish motive there, but for a lot of different reasons, I'm excited about this training package that we're putting together about how to work with residential real estate investors. So I'm sure we'll have that available for everybody once this podcast gets published.
I think something else that's really critical is helping, and especially first-time investors, helping them get started with financing. That's
Yeah.
something that they are very, very afraid of, and just giving them multiple options for that. That's very, very important. And a lot of agents are not familiar. They don't know where to begin.
Yeah. I mean, and another shameless plug, Laci, so forgive me, but
I love it. I love every second of it. Keep going.
we've got a partnership or a relationship. It's not a partnership, but a relationship with Lending One, and they exclusively do lending for real estate investors. Now, they're looking for real estate investors that have, a little bit of experience. And one of the criteria is that they have to be purchasing within an LLC. So they already have to have an LLC set up and so forth. But these folks work on, and where's my handy neighborhood Google machine here? So they are a DSCR lender, and I can never remember what DSCR stands for. So here we go. This is just what we preached, right? DSCR. Ooh, DSCR lender.
Is that the sound that Google makes when it's thinking?
Yeah. And it also is when I'm an old guy who has trouble making his thumbs work. Debt service coverage ratio. That's what DSCR reads. So what it is a DSCR lender doesn't really care what the house next door sold for. When they value that property, they're going to value that property based on the rents that's collected and how much the taxes and insurance and so forth are. So Lending One, fantastic resource. I think, my experience, I have no reason to hide it. I work with Park National Bank. They're a regional bank that works with a lot of investors. So, those are two great resources, and we're happy to get you in touch with real people if you want to reach out. But, a regional bank is going to be able to do a lot of great things for you, as is a DSCR lender. And it doesn't mean that, if you're buying your first rental property that, your traditional owner occupant lender can't help you. But I still think it's worthwhile, especially if you have visions of, doing this for the long term, that you want to go ahead and establish those relationships early on.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, because
And Bill
everybody's not a
Riley,
big name real estate
Yes.
investor, right? A lot of these investors are small business owners or, accidental landlords who are moving up from their house and they saw how profitable that first property was and maybe they want to buy another one. So it's a lot of the people that you work with day to day selling them their first house or selling them their next house or selling their
yeah.
forever house, right? So their forever roost. You can't just assume that they all know a lot more than you do, which Priscilla, you've made that point a couple of times, and I think that's really great. But anybody on your current client roster could be a potential investor. So having these relationships and sharing that with these folks, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. I don't want to leave Bill Riley out. I know Bill Riley's a great lender. Priscilla, you work
He's
with him.
great.
He's
Yeah, they've got,
fantastic. And he can do some rental property work also, and he does a hell of a job. But there does come a point in everybody's investment career where they need a little bit more flexibility, and sometimes, somebody who lends their own money as opposed to, government-backed Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac money. So there is a place for, quote, the retail lender and all this as you're getting started, but there's other options out there that can help you grow.
So I have another question. We've talked about kind of this being the niche that makes you rich. And we've also talked about how constantly this industry is changing. What does that look like for agents who work with investors? What does the future look like? Is this obviously we think this is kind of a smart investment in your future. We probably wouldn't be doing a podcast and creating a training about it if we didn't think so. But, what are your thoughts about that, Chris? Why is this a good step for young agents or agents who want to future-proof themselves? Why is this a good step for them?
There's a Jeff Bezos story that from a few years ago where I think he told an interviewer that he didn't really care about the things that were going to change over the next 25 years. All he cared about was what was going to stay the same over the next 25 years. And one thing that we know for sure, everybody's going to need a roof over their heads. But the other thing that we're seeing and the trend is that there's a greater percentage of people that are renting properties to live in for the long term versus buying properties to live in for the long term. And that trend is not going to change. It goes back and forth. In some markets, it's 50%, but it never gets above, 60, 65. So there's always going to be people who are looking to rent properties and either not want to buy a property or not be in a position to buy a property, right? So never, ever going to change. So that means there's always going to be investors. And when investors make money, they always want to buy more properties. That's never going to change, right? And basic math doesn't change. There's just so much about this that it's not, there's nothing about working with investors. I shouldn't say nothing, but there's very little about working with investors that AI is going to eliminate us, right? AI is going to make us incredibly powerful and smart and so forth, right? All we have to do is ask ChatGPT, what's the ROI of this property if the blah, 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 and get an answer instantly. But people are always going to need a roof over their heads. People are always going to rent. There's always going to be investors. If you're in property management, as far as I know, AI, Zillow still can't unclog a toilet, right? There's still things that have to happen to keep a roof over people's heads that are just not going to change. People still respect competency. They still respect loyalty. They respect people who show up and do what they say they're going to do. And I think those are the biggest reasons I think anybody can think of as to why, if you're a real estate professional, I mean, who wouldn't want to cultivate those kinds of relationships?
So we have a whole nother podcast episode about the unfair advantage that real estate agents should be taking control of, and that is, being investors themselves, why real estate
Yes.
agents should be investors, right? But I was just thinking about the unique opportunities specifically for real estate agents that work with Roost, and kind of our relationship with investors. Can you talk a little bit about the unfair advantage that Roost agents have specifically with investors?
Well, I mean, we do work with a lot of investors because of the property management division. There's no question about that. And from time to time, and again, it depends on the season that we're in, right? If we're in a buying season or a selling season, there's a lot of buying and selling opportunity that happens within, our owner group. No question about it. But the other thing is, and if you're going to choose to work with investors and to have Gretchen and the property management team, they're available to answer questions, to talk to, your client, to, let them know what happens after the sale and so forth. I do feel like that's a huge benefit to our folks to have that in-house and be able to, have a joint conversation or a joint Zoom, or I do think that's a plus. But
To
again,
have another property right down the road that we've managed for X number of years that you have the data for, I do think that that can make a difference in
well,
in
we've
the
been doing,
transaction and the successful,
yeah.
how successful you are as an agent, just having that information available to you,
We
right?
have a lot of institutional wisdom. We started doing property management. I think it was, what was it? I don't even remember. It's when Gretchen got her license. So it's probably 2010 or so, and we've got people on the property management team that have been with us for, God, 10, 12 years. So we have a lot of institutional wisdom. We've got owners that have been with us the entire time that we've done property management. So I do think that's a benefit that trickles down to every single agent, but it's definitely a benefit for agents who want to cultivate a business working with investors for sure.
I would say as an agent working for Roost, it's a major benefit because when I have investors, especially out of state, I can connect them with Tina or with Gretchen immediately, and they can give them a full rundown of property management. And it just gives them such a feel, it gives them so much comfort to know that it's basically like a one-stop shop. They can work with me. I can help them find, their investment property, and then I can immediately turn them over to Gretchen and Tina, and they're going to take care of them on getting everything set up, managing that property. And they're out of state. So, I mean, they have such a sense of relief, which is so nice because I'm not having to send them off to another building per se.
The other thing I think is a help too, and this is with the retail business as well. We've got, gosh, what are we up to now? I think we have 7 W-2 maintenance team members on staff that are doing unit turns. They're doing maintenance and occupied units. But I've got a listing coming up near Enon, and they just needed to have they had some exterior trim that was wood trim. Some of it was rotted, needed to be replaced and painted. And, we were able to send our guys over there, knock it out in 4 hours, far better price than they were ever to get by having to call a contractor to come in. But there's just a lot of different synergies that I think sometimes we take for granted that are there for agents. If you have something that needs to be done with a listing to get it sold, or it needs to be done quick and at a fair price, we've got that. God forbid, we have an agent with a listing and they can't sell it for whatever. I don't mean the agent can't sell it, but the property doesn't sell for whatever reason. At least there's a alternative. Well, you could rent it. Let's at least explore that as an option so they can talk to somebody on the team to see what it would rent for, what that would cost, and so forth. So yeah, I do think there are some synergies there. And again, in a time when there's still some consternation amongst us realtors about, the NAR lawsuit and the commissions and so forth, I do feel like, and it is, that there's stability in working with investors. And, even if it becomes 10, 15, 30% of your overall business, it's going to create a steady income, even when the rest of the market is a little off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a conversation we have a lot on this podcast, which is finding, the right fit. So finding the right fit brokerage. And in this case, Roost is probably not alone. We're very proud of Roost. We're very proud of the synergy that we have, but there are other brokerages out there, if you're listing out of state or if you're listing in another area, that do this work as well. But finding the broker that fits your goals. So if working with investors seems like a good goal for you, if it's something you've thought about in the past, if it's something you're already doing, finding a brokerage that supports that in whatever way, I think is huge for an agent. And in making sure that whatever your goal is, even if it's not this, that synergy is there, I think is the really great point that you made here. And what we like, we don't want agents to come to Roost that are not going to fit in, that we're not going to be able to support with what we offer. So if you're an agent and you're looking for that, then that's what you have to ask. So maybe I'll repost that masterclass we did so long ago about finding a right fit broker. But I want to end with, we're kind of out of time here, so I want to end with one more question. If I could do one thing as an agent to move forward with working with investors, what is that next right step to take?
I would say that you want to download the new self-guided training program that we have called How to Work with Residential Property Real Estate Investors. But above and
Shameless
beyond
plug
that,
number 2. I love it.
but above and beyond that, I honestly, if anybody wants to, talk to me about working with investors, or, how we do it at our company, you can just go to the website. My phone number's there, email's there, and so forth. I think, I don't want to speak for Priscilla, but Priscilla, my guess is you'll talk to just about anybody as much as I will. So, if we can be of help to anybody out there, we're happy to be of help. And if we can add value, we're thrilled to do it.
That's what I would say. Pick up the phone and call 5 people that you think are interested in possibly investing, who have, considered it. They've talked about it. Maybe they're thinking about dabbling in it. Just, pick up the phone, invite them to lunch and talk about it.
Yeah, get started. But if you have any questions about how to service them along the way, call us and ask questions. We'll learn something too. All right, does that wrap it up, ladies? I guess I sort of rambled on about this. That was a quick hour.
Time flies when you're having fun, I hear.
All right, Priscilla, thank you for doing this with us today. So thanks for
Thank you,
listening
guys.
to this episode of the Connect, Practice, Track, and Grow podcast. If you're ready to stop being afraid of investors and start building confidence, make sure you download our free self-guided training, How to Work with Residential Real Estate Investors. And until next time, remember to connect, practice, track, and grow.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.